So the epistle reading today from St. Paul says, let me read it to you so I don't misquote him. Therefore come out from among them and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch nothing unclean, and then I will welcome you in, and I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. Now it's no mistake or coincidence that the epistle reading is in tandem with the gospel reading that speaks about the demoniac. You know, the other day my garage door broke, and I spent most of the day repairing it. And one of the things you don't realize about a garage door is how much grease is in the wheels and in the hinges and all those things. And I had grease. It started out on one finger. I thought it was going to be a clean project. And by the end, I had grease in my hands, and it was on my shirt. It was on my pants. And then you rub your face like this, and you realize that you look like a football player on a sunny day. And the grease smeared all over the place. It got everywhere. And the same thing with the understanding of our lives is all we need is a little bit of dirt in our lives. And it seems to permeate everywhere. If you think about it, even if you leave your door open in your home and a fly flies in, you could have one fly in your home and it seems like it's everywhere at the same time, right? It's on your food, it's in the washroom, it's flying around your head, and it's everywhere. And it spins around and goes all over the place, and until you either kindly let it outside or you kindly give it the back of a swatter, it still is bugging you everywhere. It permeates your home, and it kind of overtakes your home. That's a fly. If it's a bee, it's even worse, right? Or a wasp. That tends to put everybody on guard, and we all realize that that's an awful thing to have within our home flying around. Well, St. Paul speaks today about really putting away and not touching the things that are unclean, the things that we let into our homes that are dirty, and the things that we let into our lives that stain us. And I'm not talking about animals, I'm not talking about insects, I'm talking about ways of life and about demons specifically. Now, every time a priest speaks about demons, it seems that there is the twofold understanding. One, some people understand it as being real and true, and that's the way it is, and then other people say, oh, he's over the top talking about demons. But if we can talk about God and we understand the power of God, then how can we possibly turn our backs to the understanding that evil does exist, that demons are real, that the devil is real? How can we turn our backs to that? How can we look at the saints and say, yes, they were beheaded and slaughtered by who? By just mean people? Or by people who were demonized, people who were possessed, people who were purely evil? Well, the gospel reading today speaks about the demoniac, and it speaks about the man who lives in the tombs, and he's fierce, he's crazy, and he's wild. And everyone knew he was terrible. He was walking around naked, and he was yelling, and when Christ confronts him, what's the first thing that happens is there's that confession of faith, right? And not a confession of faith in a good way, but the understanding of who God is. The demons, many times in the Gospels, are the first ones to recognize Christ for who he is. And what's the exclamation that is said? Son of the Most High God. Son of the Most High God. What do you have to do with us? Do not torment us. Son of the Most High God. How many times did Christ speak to the disciples and say, who do you say that I am? And who do they say that I am? And even in front of Pilate, he's speaking, and he says, who are you? Tell me, where do you come from? Everyone was confused, but the demons knew exactly who Christ was. Son of the Most High God. Have you come to torment us? To torment us. And then Christ says to the man, what is your name? And he says, Legion. Now, for those who are familiar with military terms, legion means many. Many, many, many soldiers. Not just one, but over hundreds of soldiers. Now, when he says legion, who is he talking to? He's talking to the demons are speaking through that man. And they're speaking to Christ saying, there are so many of us in here in this man that we call ourselves legion. And then if you think about it, now you might think, there was a herd of swine going down. A herd, not just one pig, not two pigs, but a herd, a whole entire herd. And they said, cast us into the herd of swine, because they knew they were going to be sent into oblivion. So Christ cast them into the herd of swine. The swine jumped over the bank and went into the water and drowned. Now, there's so many things that you could talk about with this story of Christ's life. But the one important thing that I want you to think about is the fact that it took Christ to get the demons out, but it took that man, to let the demons in. It wasn't Christ giving the demons to this man. It wasn't anything that was open and he just happened to stumble into it. But it was the man opening himself up for this demonic possession. Now, St. Paul reminds us in the gospel, or in the epistle, he says, touch nothing unclean, and I will welcome you in. Well, if we think about the uncleanliness of our lives, what do we embrace? What do we take into our lives? And what do we need to keep out of our lives? It takes Christ to exorcise the demons out of our lives. But unfortunately, all it takes for us is a simple choice to open the door to the demons and let them in our house, to take the grease and the dirt of life and to smear it over ourselves and to let it spread with every handshake, to let it spread with everything we bump into if we are allowing those things in our lives. Now, we are coming to the unfortunate time of year called Halloween, October 31st, where the pagan and satanic rituals have permeated the school systems, where Christ has been eradicated from the school systems, and we don't say Christmas break, we say winter holiday. We don't say Easter break, we say spring break. But yet we still say Halloween. Now, Halloween is a Druidic pagan holiday that was linked into All Hallows Eve or All Saints Eve, which was a Western celebration of All Saints Day that we don't celebrate at this time of the year. But it was the Western celebration of All Saints Day. But also, there was a particular demon in the Druidic culture called Samhain, and that particular demon was the demon of death, the god of death for them. And he would roam, and he needed to be appeased, and he needed to be calmed, so he would go from house to house and ask for treats to be appeased, is where we get the treats from. And if you didn't have a treat, then he was there to cause problems in your household. So what people would do is they would dress up as demons to trick the demons, which is where we see the people dressing up as skeletons, as witches, as terrible things, as murderers, as scary movies, and all these awful things that we see. The main problem is that if we mock and if we dress up and we have our children dress up as these things, then we stamp the seal of approval upon it. And if we go out and we mingle, everyone knows that usually on Halloween something happens to a neighbor's house or nothing good happens on Halloween. And there's always some kind of bad activity that happens. Well, that bad activity needs to change with us. And that's why this year we will have, on Halloween, we will have a paraclesis service here at church at 6:30, and I will have candy to give out to your children. So they don't have to go trick-or-treating, they don't have to go mingle with the demons, they don't have to go play games with the bad kids, but we will have special gifts for them for coming to that paraclesis service, to supplicate to the Virgin Mary, to pray for us and to protect us, and to take and to transform and to follow what St. Paul says, touch nothing unclean, and I will welcome you in. You know, Elder Yakovos of Evia, who I speak of frequently, would never eat anything that was given to him from someone else because he was worried and had many people who wanted to kill him in his life, as many of the saints had. Even St. John Maximovich, who I wear here today, and I'll speak about him later in the service, was another one who many people hated him. And many of the saints are martyrs because people wanted to kill them. Well, Elder Yakovos would not eat anything from anyone. He wouldn't take any food, not even a piece of prosphoro, or andidron. He wouldn't take anything because he said, if I need it, God will provide it. But yet, if we think about Halloween and sending our kids out and going to a stranger's house and accepting food, candy, and whatever, how do we know that that candy wasn't blessed over an altar of evil, or that it wasn't prepared and some particular bad thing was associated with that? You know, if you think about it, we have icons in our home because why? Because they're blessed, right? And icons have been sources of miracles, they've been sources of healing, they've been myrrh flowing because they're blessed. But how do we know that something we bring into our house isn't cursed, isn't evil, isn't of witchcraft or demonic? And you might be saying, oh, Father's over the top, he's talking about candy here. Well, it all starts from a little piece of candy, right? It all started from a little piece of fruit in the Garden of Eden. And what do we tell our kids when they're little? Don't accept candy from strangers, right? We tell them that. And yet, society in America, after all those things, stranger danger, don't do this, after all that, what do? We go buy outfits for our kids and make them look like demons, and then we send them out to our neighbors and the strangers and say, go get candy tonight, it'll be a good thing. It's incomprehensible. So when we think about our lives, and we think about this demoniac, we think he went and lived among the tombs. And yet, the people were scared to go pray for those who had died in that area, and I'm sure that's where they encountered him. But yet, even in today's society, we see these ridiculous meetings where people go to cemeteries on Halloween, or they even, in various organizations will go and do graveyard walks. For what? And why do we participate in that? Are we opening the door to say, okay, demons, come into my life? Especially when we reflect and we look at how much God has done for us. Do we slap him in the face by going and playing games with the demons, by playing games with evil, and by doing things that are unbecoming for us as Christians and open the door for us to become possessed? Now you might be saying, has there ever been anyone possessed? Yes. Has there ever been anyone possessed in this church? Yes. Have I done exorcisms on someone who's possessed? Yes, I have. It's a real thing. And when you think it's not real is when the devil has a foothold and says, listen, Father's off the wall. It's never going to happen to you. You're a good guy or you're a good girl. Don't worry about it. You just keep doing what you're doing. Fit in with society. Fit in. Don't worry about anything because you'll be fine. And whose voice is that saying that? It's not St. Paul. St. Paul says, stand out from among them, be different, and touch nothing unclean. Christ says, come to me, and I will make your burden easy and your load light. So whose voice are we listening to, especially at this time of the year? Now, I like fall. I like the harvest time. I like hay. I like pumpkin pie. I mean, who doesn't? But I do not like, and I cannot stand in front of you today without condemning the behaviors that have become so normal in society. If your school for your children promotes making audio recordings, and this is real too. This happened in our school system, in my school system, a nice little town of Geneva, right? And everybody knows Geneva for 3rd Street. Well, what you don't know is about the school system. One of the activities they had was to make a sound recording of demons screaming and yelling because that was the music class. Well, that wasn't going to be the music class for my kids. And if I had to go all the way to the superintendent to get that fixed, I would have, but thank God, and through the strength of the saints, that was stopped. But what about these other things? What about the kids that come in the school system, in your kids' school, and they have the dress-up days, and they come looking like demons or whatever? You know, it was very interesting. I remember reading, or it wasn't reading, I was watching a program, and somebody was talking about, I think it was Mrs. Doubtfire, and she, the making of, and it was Robin Williams talking about as he had this makeup put on to become a woman, he felt himself transform, and he felt like he was a woman. And I was thinking about that, and I said, well, what happens when people dress up as demons? What happens when people dress, superheroes? For anyone who's got a little boy or ever had a little boy, you put a cape on that kid, and what do? They jump off their bed, right? They jump, they fly, they're running through the house, and you're like, you can't fly. And you have to remind them, but I remember as a kid too. You put a cape on and you put a big S on your shirt, whether it stands for Spiro or Superman, and you think you can go. What happens when you put the other things on? What happens when you are around those other things? I always told the Goyans, if you have problems saying things in the middle of the day at school, just imagine, now we're going to pick Harriet here in the front row. Hey, let's pick Peter. Come here, Peter. Prokopi, come forward. Okay, so he's a good kid, so I'm not going to, so come on up here. But now if he's going through his day at school, and he's by himself, and he's scared or sad, and I said, you know what, I'm going to come to school with you. And I stood behind him like this all day, with my vestments on, all day like this, behind him. Do you think the other kids would bother him? No, they'd be scared. But you know what? The great thing, Prokopi, is you do have somebody standing behind you. You have Christ, you have the Virgin Mary, you have your guardian angel with you. But now, if I send Prokopi to school, and he's sitting in the midst of his table, and some kid dressed up like a demon, the other kid's a witch, and the other kid's a skeleton, and they're sitting next to him, how do you think he's going to feel? Would you be scared? You'd be scared. Of course you'd be scared. You can go sit down with your dad. He'd be scared because that's what we surround ourselves with. So we have to think about, what are we surrounding ourselves with? What are we putting into our lives? What are we welcoming in? What are we pushing out? For all of you, I've made a copy of an article on the Pangadi, the candle stand, about Halloween. And it answers some very simple questions. How do we participate? What do we do? How do we look at these things? How do we prevent ourselves from being in the midst of all these nasty things? Now, the thing you have to realize as a Christian, you're not going to be friends with everybody, despite what we think is the initial knee-jerk Christian reaction. Well, if I'm a Christian, I have to be friends with everybody. No, you don't. You don't have to follow the ways of the world. You don't have to follow the whims of society. You don't have to follow the cultures that are out there. And we pick and choose what cultures we're going to adhere to. If it was something that was clearly against our theology and we understood that simply, then we'd say, no, we can't follow that. We can't. The society should not be doing that. But many times we look at things and we make little evaluations. What is death penalty? Let me think about it. Abortion? Let me think about it. About same-sex marriage? Let me think about it. And we start drawing conclusions. Halloween? Let me think about it, right? And we start drawing lines back and forth. If we're not hardcore and we say, this is where I got to go, St. Paul says, don't touch anything unclean, you move forward, then you know what? You're not going to be friends with everybody in your neighborhood, period. You might not even be friends with your kid's teacher. Who cares? It's about saving your soul and about allowing God to save your soul. And if you lightheartedly look at your children and let them and throw them in the midst of things that you wouldn't throw yourself into, then what are we doing? Are we sober parents, or are we just, offering our kids up for, suffering? There was a story about a little boy who was possessed, and he had many problems. And the priest came to him and said, "How did this happen?" And he was looking at his little boy who was like 4 years old or something. And the priest was talking, and they said, "Well, I don't know how it happened." So the priest started asking questions to the parents. What do you do? Do you go to church? Do you pray? Who's in your house? Who do you hang around with? Who do you talk to? What do you watch on TV? What do you listen to? And as the priest was hearing these things, he started to realize that it was the parents who welcomed that in and poisoned their child. Poisoned their child. Just like serving them bad food, they serve them the wrong atmosphere. It's very, very real. And if I could just end on one particular story that I was told by a priest just recently about, he had a call from this family. This is a true story, by the way. This is no joke. He was called by a family to come and bless the house, and the father was very sick, and the father was delusional. And the priest went to the house, and he was in there, and the little child was in the corner of the house, and he was screaming, "There's a demon in that corner of the house, and I can't get to my room because he's in the corner." And the priest was telling me, he goes, "I walked in the house, it was just dark. Even with the lights on, it was just dark inside. It was just, had a weird feeling." And he said this little child was traumatized. "There's a demon in the house. There's a demon in the house." And the father was off, he was completely off kilter and suffering from many things. And so the priest went in and he blessed the house. And then he read the exorcism prayers over the father. And as he read the exorcism prayers over the father passed out. And he said, as I was reading those prayers, now this is how real this is. He says, as I was reading those prayers, he goes, you know how you have hearing, and you can hear there's open space on this side, there's open space on this side. He goes, the father was here, the wife was there, the child was there, and I felt something up against my ear. And it blocked my hearing on my right side. And he said, I could feel the breath on my side of my face. And he said, I just kept reading the prayers and not looking around. And he goes, I knew what was there. I knew what I was dealing with. And he said, after the prayers, after he blessed the house, that was gone. And the family now is on the path to spiritual recovery. But to have a priest say, I felt that in my ear. I felt that block, that there was something right here, and felt the breath on his face. And yet did not look up, did not stop his prayers, but kept continuing. And as that man dropped, he came up and he was a different person. It's very real. Everything is very real. And I say this not to shock and awe you, not to sedate you and say, sedate your joy of this day of the liturgy, but to warn you to be very careful on what you serve yourself, what you serve your family, and what you associate yourselves with, so that you will never, ever be like the man in the tombs roaming around wild with not just one demon, but thousands of demons around you. May God continue to strengthen us, to exorcise the demons from us, and to bless us always. Amen.